That was fascinating, Gemma, and I think just on that last slide, the present government has, of course, put in the Environmental Improvement Plan a green in 15 target. Not much teeth behind it, but the fact that they've recognised that access to green and blue spaces is a health equity issue. So there's stuff already happening. But yeah, I think a lot of this, it's great to follow that kind of presentation. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I work for the Wildlife Trusts in the central bit. There are 46 independent wildlife trusts across the UK. So one might be a city, it might be Birmingham and Black Country, or London Wildlife Trust, and you've got Scotland Wildlife Trust as one huge big one, and then you've got the Isles of Scilly. So it's a real spectrum of size, but what's important is each one of those has independence, and that's why I think in terms of wildlife trust and health being very local, it suits us very well. During COVID, a kind of opportunity arose when we had a new chief executive who thought he was going to get out and see everybody, and literally he landed on April just as lockdown happened. What that actually enabled him to do was to get all of those 46 chief executive and chairs together and come behind something collective and sign up to a 10-year or back then probably a sort of 9-year strategy. And those of you that work in federated organisations will know what an achievement that was. And what we've got now are 3 goals that everybody is signed up to. So one you wouldn't be surprised to hear as you go towards 2030, we want nature to be in recovery. What that means to people on the ground is that you would see more abundance of wildlife and habitats around you. Currently, we're probably on a trajectory to stay as is, because there will be some loss unless we're able to strengthen some of those targets. The second one, around meaningful action, there's an ambition for us to have 1 in 4 people taking action for nature or climate change. And the reason it's 1 in 4 is we see that as a sort of tipping point. There's a bit of campaign theory around that. Clearly, that means generally that people who are engaged in nature or work in the environment sector or who are volunteered in that sort of area, broadly, it's 1/3 of the population. The other 2/3 are actually quite missing from a lot of what we do. And so that's totally unachievable unless we kind of work in partnership. And then the third area, you might hear this a lot, is around nature-based solutions. But this is about talking about the societal value of what we do. So it may be that we stop flood water, or it may be that the processes that we put in clean some of the rivers, or it cools our cities, or those sorts of things. But also, the success measure you see along the bottom there, that nature will be playing a much more significant role, one in keeping people healthy and also reducing health inequality. Why does this matter? Well, it's actually, it's kind of mission critical, really. We talk about the climate and the health and the nature crisis in one breath, really, because you can't address one of those without the other, in our view. And really, talking about those 2/3, nobody's going to really care unless they've experienced what it is that they are fighting for. So that's the critical success factor, I believe, at the heart of our strategy and at the heart of our health and well-being kind of work. What nature means to the vast majority of the population is different to the present third of people who tend to visit it. And let's be honest, that tend to work in it. We're operating in a society where everyone's touch points and points of entry are and are very different to our own in the sector. So well-being and health is a huge driver for many, as you all know. And so the more that we do, and we will be doing a lot more, the greater our reach and that of our partners. So it's been quite exciting times recently. So in July, we launched some research. We deliberately went quite narrow on this research because of some of the conversations we were having with the approaching election and what might constitute a kind of realistic policy and what argument you were supposed to make. And there's always been a thing in the nature and environment sector about, well, kind of, you know, how strong is the evidence and what actual kind of cost savings are you saying? And I find that frustrating. A lot of my colleagues will, because quite often they'll be talking about the intrinsic value. But I see the sense in doing this. And so what we delivered in terms of a project, we put out a bit of research that says, could you take 5 programs from wildlife trusts? Could you actually look at what those benefits are in terms of mental health, addressing loneliness, and physical inactivity, what those gains are, where we measured them, and then attach values to each of those outcomes, and then calculate and scale it up. And this is the sort of headline that we went with, but actually what it's done locally is given each of these different programs a very strong argument in terms of their relationships with the integrated care boards, but also the natural environment sector in general. It is narrow. It doesn't take into account lots of factors in terms of gains for wildlife and access for the wider population and, you know, walkable cities and those sorts of things. So this is talking about the actual activity that goes on. So there's a couple of examples. There was one, it's called Feed the Birds. Really straightforward idea. This was one of the programs that we had assessed by health economists. And Feed the Birds is essentially a befriending initiative. So in partnership with Health and Social Care Services in Shropshire, we found people who were pretty much housebound, had a little bit of difficulty moving about. Some would be able to get out to their yards, most through the windows. And they were quite lonely and certainly isolated. And so we trained up, or Shropshire Wildlife Trust more accurately, trained up kind of befrienders to some really kind of good processes to basically go and have a conversation with that person. And what they also did while they're there, set up a feeder, supply of food, bird guiding manuals, had a bit of a chat about it, and then they said, well, we'll see how you go, and then we'll see you in a week. And then a week later on, they would come back, they'd have that conversation, and then it would just spiral from that kind of place, and their interest would go much further. If you look at social prescribing now, they're looking at nature buddies, culture buddies, they're trying to connect all these people up that might take them that step further. So that's what happens then is, oh, where could I visit locally? How far could I get moving? And literally this was only because it was a simple kind of, let's connect with nature, let's kind of look after something, let's do something meaningful. And you can see from there are some unexpected outcomes. You know, in one household, they've basically been very reluctant to let anybody in from Health and Social Care Services, but the fact that somebody was in there giving them some bird food and a book and a bit of company, and suddenly you actually get a health and social care plan put in place. So it's really important that we do that in partnership. In Pennine Care NHS Foundation Trust, so we're kind of embedded in the early intervention team there. So what we've been doing in Bury and Rochdale is working, or Lancashire Wildlife Trust have, to support people who experience psychosis, promote healthy living, socialisation, and more access to the services. Now, looking at that, you see some, if I actually push the button, you can see they're looking at some cost savings in terms of avoided mental health treatment, but also quite a lot of costs around being economically inactive. And if I told you that 16 out of 23 in one recent cohort that were unemployed when they started, so after the project, about half of those reported that they were employed post the 6-month intervention. That's quite significant in terms of their health. And that's why, you know, when you sort of go and talk to the NHS and you've got a badger on your lapel and people kind of look at you and say, well, what's that about? Actually, it's about so much more than that. It's not just about access to nature. Those kind of employability factors really do matter, or the fact that you're cutting loneliness. And that's really why when we have endorsements from sort of, you know, Professor Michael Marmot, who actually talks about health inequalities. One of a lot of you will know his work. You know, he's one of the world's preeminent experts in health inequalities. But actually, when he starts to say that what we do will prevent unnecessary illnesses, and the activity, but also the fact that we are kind of restoring nature to some of those areas within 15 minutes of those sorts of things, that combined could actually have quite a significant impact, particularly if we're able to do it at scale. And that's why I think, so this morning I asked the question around, and it's something we are pursuing, is this shared outcomes approach from governments across each of the 4 countries in the UK, is if you can take this away from health, take it out to the NHS, go to those departments and governments that actually will gain from this, that are interested in the outcomes. Loneliness is in the kind of Department of Culture, Media and Sport. That is their brief. So again, whether you agree with that or not, you've certainly got an interest in resourcing this. And then you take that and you protect it. Perhaps all of us will have something around prevention that's actually quite concrete. So we've got to work that through a little bit. I think the other thing to say is that this stuff, going back to that goal 2, the 1 in 4 taking action, this is really important. It's a culture change piece for the wildlife trusts. If you know us at all, there's lots of nature centres, visitor centres, beautiful reserves. Actually, this is about places in the community. We've recently got some funding to employ a kind of community organiser in every wildlife trust. And their first job in 2 years was to go out and do a listening programme and basically talk to people about where they kind of engage with our world, or even if they engage with our world, and start that conversation from there. And that leads you to start to think, well, what could our places be? What are some of the shared resources we can put in? What if we had a pop-up job-seeking club or a health worker or those sorts of things? And where else could we go? And this leads to some, what I would say, very unusual alliances and really effective ones. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Ian. My contact details will be on the slide as soon as Ian's finished. And with massive apologies to the guys from the University of East London, I am going to have to go and collect my daughter. But my contact details will be on there. If you do want to carry on the conversation, I'm really, really up for that. But Ian, if you could perhaps tell us about unusual alliances.
So I'm Ian Braid, the other half of the Unusual Alliance. Thanks for that. I'm also the founder and managing director of a boutique consultancy called DOCIA Sport. Boutique because there's only me in it. In the beginning of lockdown, I put a proposition to the Rugby Football League, and I said, why can't you turn amateur rugby league clubhouses and their facilities from being just soulless amateur rugby league clubhouses into community wellbeing hubs? And they said, you might have a good idea. If we write, Ian, to our 300 clubs and say we've had a good idea about community wellbeing hubs, they'll all write back and say, no, it's not, it's crap. And the reason why it's crap is because it's yours. Subconscious bias. So they said, would you like to go on a retainer? Yes. Give us 5 by the time of the Rugby League World Cup. So one of them was West Hull, right? Now, I'm a man from Lancashire, so you can't get further on the dark side than West Hull. So first of all, I have to get the buy-in from that club. So there's a subconscious bias to overcome. Go and talk to the management committee of West Hull, and they were like, what's this got to do with amateur rugby league, lad? And I said, well, what's that? This is about sustainable social, economic and environmental impact. This is about keeping the bloody lights turned on so that not only can your lad continue to play rugby league, but your lad's children will be able to play rugby league. Oh, right, no further question then, I'm in. Right, good. So then you get the community to come to the rugby league club and encourage them to see it in a different way. Now, they've got 2 lots of subconscious bias, right? One, they They know there's a rugby league club there because their community backs onto it. It doesn't see it as an asset. And they know there's a rugby league club there because they take the dog there twice a day to empty it. That's all they do. And they know there's a rugby league club there because they can't park the bloody car at the weekends because of all the parents coming, right? So that's their perception. So with that in mind, we get permission to do this in West Hull. I get permission. And this bloke, Andy, from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust rocks up, right? Now, your man Andy from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, he's got on his patch the Peak District, the Yorkshire Moors, the Yorkshire Dales, the Pennines, if I haven't said that, and the Yorkshire Coast. And you can see him coming into West Hull going, what the bloody hell have they sent me here for? Right? All this concrete, end of the M62, you couldn't get less grass if you tried. So he's let's go and have a walk. So we're taking him for a walk around the clubhouse grounds, and all of a sudden he perks up and he says, is that a rowan tree over there? Oh, it is, yeah. And those are 2 J's, aren't they? Hey, I tell you what, he said, if you get your gang mower that looks after your pitches, get them to run a wavy line through all the boundaries, because you haven't cut it for 30 years, it means like this, right? He said, get a wavy line through all that grass, you've got yourself a wildlife walk. Oh. So, fast forward a couple of weeks, we're having an open day to invite the community into the Rugby League Club to see it in a slightly different way. Your man Andy, as you can see somewhere, he's got his car here, he's got his pop-ups and all that. So I'm talking to these 3 Labour councillors, fantastic women, one of them, Councillor Tracy Deering, sunny day in Hull, as they say in the song. We've all got sunglasses on. Anyway, she eventually works out, she trusts me a bit, and she tells me she's visually impaired. She's a very competent woman. I said, Tracy, have you been on this wildlife walk? No. Andy, have you got a minute? Official Yorkshire Wildlife Trust business, so he puts his flat hat on. I said, would you take Councillor Deering and Barry, her husband, on your wildlife? Oh, I'd love it. So off they go, and they come back, and the 3 of them are buzzing, right? And Andy says to me, he said, well, clearly Tracy can't see very well because of her visual impairment, but she makes up for it with her ears and her nose. I can't hear bugger all, me, says this bloke. He said, so we were a good tag team, and we found these 2 species of grasshopper, and we showed them to Barry, and Barry had never seen grasshoppers in his life before. And it was a drop the mic, you know. I thought, bloody hell. So now it's a sensory walk. The kids come in, bug hunts, all of that malarkey. People coming into the club that have never been there before, who might stick around. But the relationship is sustainable because I've sent Dom 2 pictures on Twitter from the West Hull Community Wellbeing Hub, and they're all sat on a bus. Andy and a lot of the people from the Community Wellbeing Hub going to the seaside for the day. And there's another one of the Community Wellbeing Hub. They have a Thursday morning open day, bit of bingo, all that malarkey. Andy's back in again. You can't get rid of the bugger. He's back in again, and he's talking about wildlife in and around the area. It's brilliant. So I ran 5 community wellbeing hubs: Shevington, St Helens, Leeds, West Hull and Salford. And I made myself redundant, which is what I wanted to do, because the locals now all own it. It's their gig and they're running with it. All roads don't lead to Ian Braid. I got made redundant a bit too quick, to be honest with you, as a consultant, but anyway, never mind. And I'm now doing it again in rugby union in Sussex, in socially deprived areas. It's brilliant. I could go on for hours. I'm off, but I'm going to hang around later. So thank you very much for listening. Oh, hang on. The Unlikely Alliance didn't fulfil his gig. There we are. There's.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Thanks for that. Absolutely fascinating.